The mop made a soft swishing sound as it moved across the polished floor, back and forth, back and forth. Daniel had been doing this same motion for 3 years now, and his arms knew the rhythm by heart. It was 10:30 at night, and the concert hall was finally empty. The fancy crowd had left an hour ago, still chatting about the amazing piano performance they'd just witnessed. Now it was just him and the silence. Daniel pushed his cleaning cart down the center aisle, between rows of red velvet seats. Some still had programs left behind on them. He picked them up one by one, glancing at the pianist's name printed in gold letters. Another famous musician, another sold-out show, another night of watching from the shadows while someone else lived the dream. He was 38 years old, though lately he felt much older. His hands were rough now, covered in small scars and calluses from years of manual work. These weren't the hands of a pianist anymore. At least that's what he told himself every single day. The concert hall was beautiful at night when everyone was gone. The crystal chandeliers still glowed softly overhead, casting warm light across the empty space. Daniel had always loved this building. Even now, even after everything, he couldn't help but feel something special when he walked through these halls. This place had history, real music history, and he was part of it even if nobody knew his story. His daughter was 7 now, Lily. She was the reason for everything. The reason he woke up at noon after working until 3 in the morning. The reason he'd given up on the life he'd planned. The reason he kept going when everything felt impossible. Lily didn't know that her father had once been someone different. She'd never seen the newspaper clippings he kept hidden in a shoebox under his bed. Articles about a young piano prodigy who'd won every competition he entered. Photos of him at 22, wearing a tuxedo, bowing on stage after a performance. A letter from one of the most prestigious music schools in the world, offering him a full scholarship. That was a different person, a different life. That version of Daniel had dreams that reached all the way to concert halls like this one. He'd imagined his name on those glossy programs, his face on posters in the lobby. He'd practiced 8 hours a day every day until his fingers bled. Music wasn't just what he did. It was who he was. Then everything changed in a single moment. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. His girlfriend was pregnant. They were both so young, barely out of their teens. She was scared. He was terrified. But he'd looked at that scholarship letter and made a choice. He'd chosen responsibility over dreams. He'd chosen to be a father. The first few years were hard, but they were happy. He worked 2 jobs during the day and played piano at a hotel bar at night. It wasn't Carnegie Hall, but it was something. He was still making music, still touching those keys, still feeling that connection to something bigger than himself. Then she left. Just like that. One morning he woke up and she was gone. No warning. No fight the night before. Just a note on the kitchen table that said she couldn't do this anymore. She needed to find herself. She wasn't ready to be a mother. She was sorry. Daniel remembered standing in their tiny apartment, holding that note in one hand and his crying baby in the other. Lily was only 6 months old. She didn't understand why her mother wasn't coming back. She just knew that something was wrong. She cried for 3 days straight. That's when the music stopped. Daniel couldn't afford childcare and gigs at the same time. He couldn't practice when Lily needed him every moment. He couldn't chase a music career while raising a baby alone, so he made another choice. He found a stable job with health insurance. He became invisible. The custodian position at the concert hall had seemed like a cruel joke at first. Cleaning the very stage he'd dreamed of performing on, mopping floors while others made music, but it paid enough to cover rent and groceries. It came with health benefits, and most importantly, the night shift meant he could be home with Lily during the day. So he took the job, and he buried his dreams so deep that sometimes he almost forgot they'd ever existed. Almost. Daniel finished mopping the main floor and pushed his cart toward the stage. This was always the last part of his shift. The stage itself. The place where magic happened every single night. Just never for him. He climbed the steps slowly, his work boots heavy on the wood. The grand piano still sat in the center, exactly where tonight's performer had left it. It was a Steinway, worth more than Daniel would make in 5 years. Maybe 10. The black surface gleamed under the stage lights. He wasn't supposed to touch it. His job was to clean around it, not interact with it. The piano tuner came every week to maintain it. The performers were the only ones allowed to play it. But Daniel was alone. The building was empty. And sometimes, late at night like this, the pull was too strong to resist. He sat down on the bench, just for a moment, just to remember what it felt like. His fingers hovered over the keys, not quite touching them. His heart was pounding. This was stupid, dangerous. If anyone caught him, he'd lose his job, and he couldn't afford to lose this job. But his hands came down anyway, soft at first. Just a few notes. A simple melody from a piece he'd learned as a teenager. The sound filled the empty hall, and suddenly Daniel couldn't breathe. It had been so long. So incredibly long since he'd felt this. His fingers moved faster, finding their way through muscle memory. A Chopin nocturne, then part of a Beethoven sonata. The music poured out of him like water from a broken dam. 3 years of silence, of holding everything inside, of pretending he was fine with the life he'd been given. It all came flooding out through those keys. He played for 20 minutes, maybe 30. He lost track of time. Lost track of everything except the feeling of coming home to a place he'd forced himself to forget. When he finally stopped, his cheeks were wet. He hadn't even realized he was crying. Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand and stood up quickly. This was dangerous, not just because he might get caught, but because it reminded him of everything he'd lost, everything he'd given up, and remembering hurt too much. He finished cleaning the stage in silence, careful not to look at the piano again. Then he gathered his supplies and headed for the exit. Tomorrow he'd wake up at noon, make Lily breakfast for lunch, help her with homework, play with her at the park. He'd be dad. Just dad. And that was enough. It had to be enough. As he locked the concert hall doors behind him, Daniel pulled out his phone to check the time. 3:15 in the morning. Lily would be fast asleep at their neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Chen watched her every night while he worked, and she never asked for much money. She said she enjoyed the company. The walk home was quiet. The city was different at this hour. Peaceful. Daniel looked up at the stars barely visible through the city lights and wondered what his life might have looked like if he'd made different choices. Then he thought about Lily's laugh and decided that maybe, just maybe, he'd chosen right after all. He didn't know that everything was about to change, that in just 2 weeks, someone would finally hear him play, that his carefully constructed world of invisibility and sacrifice was about to come crashing down in the most unexpected way possible. But tonight he was just a custodian walking home, just a single father trying his best, just a man who'd buried his dreams so deep he'd almost convinced himself they were dead. Almost. 2 weeks passed like they always did. Daniel worked his nights, came home to Lily, made her meals, helped with schoolwork, and tried not to think about the piano. Tried not to think about those 20 minutes when he'd let himself remember who he used to be. It was easier to stay numb, safer, but something had shifted inside him that night, like opening a door just a crack and catching a glimpse of sunlight. Now he couldn't quite close it all the way again. Friday evening arrived with the kind of energy that made the whole building buzz. Daniel noticed it the moment he clocked in at 9. Staff members were rushing around with unusual urgency. The box office manager was on 3 phone calls at once. Even the security guard looked stressed. Tonight was the annual charity gala, the biggest event of the year. Tickets cost more than Daniel made in a month, and every seat was sold out. The money raised went to music education programs for kids who couldn't afford lessons. Daniel always found that ironic. Rich people paying thousands of dollars to feel good about helping poor kids learn music. But he couldn't be bitter about it. Programs like that mattered. Maybe someday Lily would benefit from one. He started his shift in the lobby, emptying trash bins and wiping down the marble counters. Through the tall windows he could see expensive cars pulling up. Women in evening gowns, men in tuxedos, jewels that probably cost more than his entire apartment building. This was a different world, a world he'd once thought he might be part of. Now he just cleaned up after it. By 9:30, the performance had started. Daniel could hear the muffled sound of music through the walls as he worked the back corridors. The program tonight featured some famous pianist from overseas, someone important enough that people had been talking about this night for months. Out or destroy him. His body moved with the music, swaying, bending, every muscle working together. Sweat was forming on his forehead, but he didn't notice. His work boots pressed the pedals with the same precision his fingers used on the keys. The calluses on his hands, the ones from mopping floors and carrying supplies, somehow made the sound even more powerful, like his suffering had become part of the music itself. The piece built and built, climbing higher, getting more intense. Daniel's breathing was heavy now. This was physically exhausting. He'd forgotten how much energy it took to really play. Not just press keys, but pour your entire soul into it. His arms ached. His back hurt. But he couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. In the fourth row, an elderly woman started crying. She didn't know why. The music just touched something in her that hadn't been touched in years. Beside her, her husband was gripping his armrests, his knuckles white. In the back, a young music student was recording on her phone with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. This was what she'd always dreamed music could be. What she'd been chasing but never quite found. Helen stood in the wings, one hand pressed to her mouth. Raymond was next to her, nodding slowly like he'd known all along. He'd heard Daniel play, but never like this. Never in front of people. Never with this much emotion. This much truth. Daniel drove into the hardest passage, the part where most pianists struggled. His fingers flew across the keys so fast they were almost a blur, left hand and right hand dancing together in perfect coordination. Every note clean, every transition smooth. This was the part he'd practiced 10,000 times as a young man, the part his teacher had said would make or break him. His hands had not forgotten. Even after 3 years of pushing mops instead of practicing scales, they remembered. Muscle memory was a strange thing. You could bury it, but you couldn't kill it. It lived in your bones, in your blood, waiting for the moment when you'd let it out again. The music shifted, became softer, more tender. This was the part Daniel had always loved most. The quiet section where everything stripped away and it was just simple melody, pure emotion. He thought about Lily again, about tucking her in at night, about the way she looked at him like he hung the moon, even though he was just a janitor, just a single dad doing his best. This section was for her. Every gentle note, every careful phrase. This was a lullaby disguised as a concerto. This was a father's love translated into sound. People in the audience were openly crying now. Not just one or two, dozens. They couldn't explain it. They'd come here expecting a famous pianist and expensive champagne, and a chance to feel important. Instead, they were getting something that cracked them open, something that reminded them of their own buried dreams, their own sacrifices, their own secret sorrows. The woman in the third row was thinking about the art career she'd given up to become a lawyer like her parents wanted. The man in the seventh row was remembering the son he'd been too busy to really know before he grew up and moved away. The young couple near the front were holding hands so tight it hurt, both thinking about the baby they'd lost last year. Daniel's music was doing that. Reaching into people and pulling out things they'd tried to forget, making them feel when they'd gotten so good at not feeling. This was the power of real music. Not the perfect, polished kind, but the messy, human, broken kind. The piece began building again, racing toward its climax. Daniel's whole body was engaged now, leaning into the piano, pulling back. His face showed everything he was feeling. The pain, the joy, the regret, the hope. There was no hiding up here. No pretending. The music stripped away every defense and left him completely exposed. His fingers pounded the keys in the thundering climax. Loud, powerful, like a storm breaking. Like years of silence finally demanding to be heard. The sound filled every corner of the concert hall, vibrated in people's chests, rattled in their bones. This was music you didn't just hear. You felt it, then suddenly it softened again, the storm passing, leaving something quiet and beautiful in its wake. The final section. The resolution. Daniel's hands moved gently now, almost whispering. Each note placed with such care it felt like prayer. He was nearly at the end. The last page. The final measures. Part of him didn't want it to end. Up here playing, he wasn't the janitor. He wasn't the guy who'd given up his dreams. He was just a musician. Just a man and a piano and the truth between them. But all things had to end. Even this Daniel played the final chord, let it ring out across the silent hall, held the pedal down so the sound sustained, filling the space before slowly fading into nothing. His hand stayed on the keys even after the sound died. He was breathing hard, exhausted, empty, like he'd poured out everything inside him and left nothing back. For a long moment, there was absolute silence. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the sound of breathing. The entire audience sat frozen, suspended in the space between one moment and the next. Daniel finally opened his eyes, looked out at the crowd, and for the first time since walking on stage really saw them. Hundreds of faces, all staring at him. And every single one of them had tears on their cheeks. Then someone stood up, an older man in the back row. He started clapping, slow at first, then faster. Then he was joined by the person next to him, then the person next to them. Then suddenly the entire audience was on their feet. The applause didn't just fill the room. It exploded through it, like thunder, like a wave, like something that had been building and finally crashed. People weren't just clapping politely the way they did at concerts. They were cheering, shouting, some were still crying. Others were laughing with joy. A standing ovation that went on and showed no signs of stopping. Daniel sat at the piano, completely stunned. He couldn't process what was happening. Couldn't understand how this was real. He'd expected polite applause at best, tolerant smiles, maybe some appreciation for effort even if the performance was rough. This was something else entirely. This was the kind of response professionals spent their whole careers chasing. Helen rushed onto the stage, tears streaming down her face. She grabbed Daniel's shoulders and pulled him up from the bench. Hugged him tight. "That was incredible," she kept saying. "That was absolutely incredible." Raymond appeared from the wings, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. Other staff members were crowding around. Everyone wanted to shake his hand, to say something, to be close to whatever had just happened. The audience kept clapping. Wouldn't stop. Daniel stood there in his work uniform, completely overwhelmed, while hundreds of wealthy strangers gave him the kind of ovation most musicians only dreamed about. And in that moment, Daniel realized something. He'd spent 3 years thinking he'd given up music, thinking he'd buried it so deep it was gone. But music wasn't something you could kill. It wasn't something that left you just because you stopped playing. It was in him, part of him, and it always would be. The question now was what he was going to do about it. Daniel barely slept that night. He kept replaying the performance in his mind, the feeling of the keys under his fingers, the sound of the applause, the look on Helen's face. It felt like a dream, like something that had happened to someone else. He picked up Lily from Mrs. Chen's apartment at 4 a.m, carrying his sleeping daughter up the stairs to their place. She was getting so big, 7 years old already. When had that happened? He laid her gently in her bed, pulled the blanket up to her chin and kissed her forehead. She stirred slightly. "Daddy? I'm here, sweetie. Go back to sleep. Did you have a good night at work?" Daniel paused. How did he even begin to answer that? "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah, I did." When morning came, Lily bounced into the kitchen where Daniel was making pancakes. She was wearing her favorite purple shirt and had already put her shoes on the wrong feet. He smiled and helped her fix them while the pancakes burned slightly on the stove. "Mrs. Chen said you were at a fancy concert last night," Lily said, swinging her legs under the table. She saw something on her phone. Daniel's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Lily shrugged. "She showed me a video. There were lots of people and pretty lights. She said you were there, but I couldn't really see." Daniel's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. He picked it up and his jaw dropped. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and when he opened social media, his hands started shaking. The video was everywhere. Someone had recorded his performance on their phone, posted it online, and somehow in just 12 hours it had exploded. Hundreds of thousands of views, thousands of comments, shares spreading across every platform. Custodian's secret talent stuns audience. Janitor brings entire concert hall to tears. You won't believe what this single dad can do. The comments went on forever. People from all over the world watching his performance, crying, sharing their own stories of buried dreams, talking about how his music had touched them. Some comments were from musicians who couldn't believe he wasn't performing professionally. Others were from regular people who just felt something when they listened. Daniel sat down hard in a kitchen chair. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. Viral videos were for other people. Famous people, not single dads who mopped floors for a living. His phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Is this Daniel Torres? A woman's voice, professional, excited. Yes? Mr. Torres, my name is Patricia Kim. I'm a talent manager in New York. I represent concert pianists, and I have to tell you, your performance last night was extraordinary. I'd love to talk to you about representation. Daniel's head spun. I'm sorry, what? I want to represent you, help you book performances, build your career. You have something special, something real, and people are responding to it. Over the next hour, Daniel got 6 more calls just like that one. Managers, booking agents, record labels. A morning talk show wanted him to appear as a guest. A newspaper wanted to interview him. Someone from a classical music magazine wanted to write a feature story. It was overwhelming, terrifying, exciting, confusing. All at the same time. Lily tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, you're letting the pancakes burn again. He jumped up and pulled the pan off the stove. Looked at his daughter. She was the only thing that made sense right now. The only thing that felt real. Sorry, baby. I'm a little distracted today. Because of the concert thing? Yeah, because of the concert thing. That afternoon, Helen called. Daniel, I need you to come to the hall. Can you get someone to watch Lily for an hour? Mrs. Chan agreed to take her. Daniel drove to the concert hall with his stomach in knots. What if this was all too good to be true? What if they'd changed their minds? What if last night had been a fluke and everyone had realized he wasn't actually that good? Helen was waiting in her office with 3 other people. She introduced them quickly. Board members. Important people. The kind who made decisions about the hall's future. Daniel, Helen started, and he could hear something in her voice. Something big. We've been talking all morning. About you. About last night. About what happens next. Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The video has been seen by over 2 million people now. We've gotten hundreds of emails. Donations are pouring in. People want to support the music education programs because of your story. Because you represent exactly what these programs are meant to do. You're proof that talent exists everywhere, even in people we overlook. One of the board members leaned forward. We'd like to offer you a position. Artist in residence. You'd perform here regularly. Teach master classes. Work with students. It comes with a full salary. Health benefits. Everything you need. Daniel couldn't breathe. What? We want you here, Helen said. Not as a custodian. As a musician. This is what you were meant to do, Daniel. Last night proved that. The salary they quoted was 3 times what he made mopping floors. It was stable, secure. It came with health care that would actually cover Lily's doctor visits without him having to choose between medicine and groceries. But more than that, it was music. Real music. Every single day, I don't know what to say, Daniel managed. Say yes, Helen smiled. Please say yes. Daniel thought about Lily, about giving her a better life, about not having to work nights anymore, about being home for dinner, about maybe finally being able to afford those piano lessons she'd asked for. Yes, he said. Yes, absolutely yes. The next few days were a whirlwind. News crews showed up at the concert hall wanting interviews. Daniel had to take time off from his custodian job just to handle all the requests. It felt surreal, like he'd stepped into someone else's life by accident. But the strangest part was how people treated him differently now. The staff members who used to look through him like he was invisible suddenly wanted to chat. To be his friend, to hear his story. It made him uncomfortable. He was the same person he'd been a week ago. Nothing about him had actually changed, except that wasn't quite true. Something had changed. Not who he was, but how he saw himself. For 3 years he'd told himself he was just a janitor, just a single dad getting by. He'd made himself small, invisible, safe. Now he couldn't hide anymore. The world had seen him. really seen him, and they weren't looking away. One evening, he sat Lily down on the couch. She had chocolate on her face from the ice cream he'd let her have before dinner. Bad parenting, probably, but tonight felt like a special occasion. "Baby, I need to tell you something. Some things are going to change." Lily looked worried. "Bad changes?" "No, good changes. Really good changes. You know how I work at night cleaning the concert hall?" She nodded. "Well, I'm going to have a different job now. I'm going to play piano there. Perform for people. Teach music." Lily's eyes went wide. "You can play piano?" Daniel realized with a start that she'd never seen him play. Not really. Maybe some little songs on a keyboard at a store once. But never seriously. Never the way he used to. "Yeah, sweetie. I can play piano. I used to play a lot before you were born. And now I'm going to start again. Can I hear you?" Daniel smiled. "How about tomorrow I take you to the concert hall? Show you where Daddy works. Let you hear the piano." Lily bounced excitedly on the couch. "Really? Can I touch it too?" "You can do more than touch it. I can show you how to play if you want." "I want to. I really, really want to." Watching her excitement, Daniel felt something settle in his chest. Relief maybe, or peace. For 3 years he'd thought choosing Lily meant giving up music. That he couldn't have both. That sacrifice meant cutting pieces of yourself away until you were someone else entirely. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe he could be a father and a musician. Maybe he could give Lily a good life and still chase his dreams. Maybe sacrifice didn't have to mean completely losing yourself. The video kept spreading. By the end of the week, it had 20 million views. News stations across the country picked up the story. People couldn't get enough of it. The struggling single dad who'd given up everything for his daughter, only to get a second chance at his dreams. Daniel did interview after interview. Each time they asked him the same question. "Do you regret the years you spent as a custodian? Do you feel like you wasted time?" And each time he gave the same answer. "No, those years made me who I am. They taught me what matters. They gave me Lily, I wouldn't change any of it," and he meant it. The old Daniel, the one who'd gotten that scholarship at 20, wouldn't have played the way he did last Friday. The Daniel had technique and talent. But this Daniel, the one who'd struggled and sacrificed and loved his daughter through everything, had something deeper. He had truth. And that's what people heard in his music. 3 weeks after that first performance, Daniel played his second concert. This time it was planned, advertised, sold out in minutes. And this time he wore a proper suit instead of work clothes. Helen had insisted. But before he walked on stage, he did something different. He brought Lily into the wings with him. Let her see the stage lights, the grand piano, the seats filling with people. "That's a lot of people," she whispered, holding tight to his hand. "Yeah, it is. You nervous for me?" She looked up at him. "No. You're the best piano player in the whole world." Daniel laughed. "I don't know about that, baby." "I do," she said confidently. "Mrs. Chen showed me all the comments. Everyone says you're amazing." He knelt down to her level, looked into eyes that looked so much like his own. "You know what? None of this matters as much as you. The concerts, the videos, all of it. You're still the most important thing. Always." Lily hugged him tight. "I know, Daddy. Now go play pretty music." And he did. 6 months had passed since that first performance. 6 months that felt like a lifetime and also like no time at all. Daniel still couldn't quite believe this was his life now. He stood backstage at the concert hall adjusting his tie in the mirror. A real tie, the kind he'd only worn to job interviews before. Now he wore one every time he performed. It still felt strange, like he was playing dress-up, pretending to be someone important, but the audiences didn't think he was pretending. Every concert sold out within hours. People traveled from other states just to hear him play. Not because he was technically perfect. There were pianists with better training, cleaner technique, faster fingers. But Daniel had something they didn't. He had a story that people felt when he played. He had honesty. Tonight was different, though. Tonight was special. The concert hall had partnered with the Music Education Foundation to host a benefit concert. All the money raised would go directly to providing free music lessons for kids who couldn't afford them. Kids like Daniel had been. Kids like Lily. And speaking of Lily, she was getting her own surprise tonight. Daniel walked down the hallway to the small rehearsal room where she was waiting with Mrs. Chen. Over the past 6 months, Lily had started taking piano lessons. Real ones with a real teacher. She practiced every day after school. her small fingers working through scales and simple songs. She was good, really good, and not just because he was her dad and biased. Her teacher had said so too. "Hey, sweetie," Daniel said, opening the door. "You ready?" Lily looked nervous. She was wearing a new dress, light blue with flowers on it. Her hair was pulled back with clips. She looked so grown up it made Daniel's chest hurt a little. "I'm scared," she admitted. "There's so many people out there." Daniel sat down beside her on the piano bench. "I know, I'm always scared too before I play." "Really? But you do it all the time now. Being scared doesn't go away. You just learn to do it anyway." He took her hand. "Remember what I told you? We're not playing for them. We're playing for us. For the joy of it. Everything else is just extra." Tonight, for the first time, Lily would join him on stage. Just for one piece. A simple duet they'd been practicing together at home. Nothing complicated. But it was hers. Her moment. Her chance to feel what he felt every time he sat at that piano. Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I remember when you were carrying her up those stairs in the middle of the night, exhausted from work. Look at you both now." Daniel smiled at her. Mrs. Chen had been there through everything. The hard years. The impossible years. The years when he wasn't sure they'd make it. She'd watched Lily for almost nothing. Fed them dinner when she knew they were struggling, never judged him for the choices he'd made. "She was family, thank you," he said to her. "For everything. We wouldn't be here without you." "Oh, stop," she said, waving her hand. But she was smiling. Helen poked her head in. "5 minutes, you two." Daniel stood and offered Lily his hand. "Ready to do this together?" She took his hand and nodded, even though he could feel her trembling. They walked through the backstage corridors together. The same corridors he used to push his cleaning cart through. Everything looked different now. Or maybe he was just seeing it differently. They reached the wings, and Daniel could hear the audience settling into their seats. The lights dimmed. Helen walked out to introduce them, and the crowd applauded. "Before we begin tonight," Helen said into the microphone, "I want to tell you what this concert means. 6 months ago, one man's performance changed everything for us. It reminded us why we do this work, why music education matters, why we can't give up on talented kids just because they don't have money." Daniel listened from the wings, still not comfortable with being the center of attention like this. That performance has now been seen by over 50 million people worldwide. The donations that came from it have funded music programs in 30 schools. We've provided instruments to hundreds of students, given scholarships to dozens more. And tonight we continue that work. The audience applauded. Daniel squeezed Lily's hand. "But more importantly," Helen continued, "Daniel's story reminds us that it's never too late, that dreams don't die just because we put them aside for a while, that sometimes the best music comes from people who've lived real life, who've struggled, who've sacrificed, who've loved deeply enough to give up everything only to find their way back." Helen gestured toward the wings. "Please welcome Daniel Torres and his daughter Lily." They walked out together, father and daughter, hand in hand. The applause was thunderous, but Daniel barely heard it. He was focused on Lily, making sure she was okay. They sat at the piano bench together, Daniel adjusting it so Lily's feet could reach the pedals with his help. He looked at her. "You got this?" She nodded, her face serious with concentration. "Okay then. Let's make some music." Daniel started the piece. A gentle melody, something classical but not too complex. His hands moved over the keys on the right side while Lily joined in with the left-hand part. Her notes were careful, precise, a little hesitant at first, but then something happened. The same thing that always happened when you stopped thinking and started feeling. Lily relaxed. Her fingers found their rhythm. And suddenly they weren't just playing notes. They were playing together, creating something beautiful as a team. Daniel watched her face while he played, saw the concentration turn to joy, saw the fear melt away, saw her discover what he'd discovered all those years ago. That music wasn't about being perfect. It was about expression, connection, truth. They reached a section where their hands crossed over each other, weaving the melody between them. Left, right, like a conversation. Daniel playing a phrase, Lily answering it, back and forth. Father and daughter speaking to each other through music in a way words could never capture. The audience was completely silent, watching this moment, understanding that they were witnessing something more than just a performance. They were watching a father share his gift with his daughter, watching a little girl step into her own potential, watching a family heal and grow and become something new, the piece built to its gentle climax. Nothing dramatic or showy, just both of them playing together, their hands dancing over the keys in harmony. Then it softened again, winding down to a peaceful ending. The final notes hung in the air. Lily looked up at Daniel with wide eyes like she couldn't believe they'd actually done it. He smiled at her, proudly. Then they both stood and took a bow together. The audience erupted. But this time it wasn't just applause. People were on their feet immediately, cheering. Some were crying again, but these were different tears. These were happy tears, hopeful tears. Tears for second chances and dreams rekindled, and fathers who showed their daughters that anything was possible. Lily beamed, holding Daniel's hand and bowing again. She wasn't scared anymore. She was glowing. After the concert, after the last audience member had left and Lily had fallen asleep in the green room, Daniel walked out onto the empty stage one more time. Raymond was there doing his final check of the piano for the night. "That was something special tonight," Raymond said. Daniel sat on the edge of the stage, his legs dangling. "You know, I spent 3 years angry at this place. Angry at this piano. Angry at myself for giving everything up. And now I realize I didn't give anything up. I just took a different path. Those 3 years with Lily, raising her alone, learning to be a dad, working those night shifts, that was part of my story. Part of what makes me who I am. Part of what I pour into the music." Raymond nodded slowly. "The best musicians aren't the ones who practice the most. They're the ones who live the most." Daniel looked out at the empty seats. Half a year ago, he'd been invisible here. Someone people looked past. Someone who didn't matter. Now every seat had been filled with people who came to hear him play. Not because he was famous, but because his music meant something. Because his story meant something. His phone buzzed. A text from one of the booking agents. Another concert request. A prestigious venue in another city. Good money. Great exposure. He'd say yes. But he'd also make sure he was home for Lily's school play next month. Make sure he could still help with homework. Still make her breakfast. Still be her dad first and a pianist second. Because that's what he'd learned. You didn't have to choose between loving someone and being yourself. You didn't have to sacrifice everything to pursue a dream. Sometimes the dream changed. Sometimes it got better. Sometimes it became about more than just you. Daniel stood up and walked to the piano one last time. Sat down. Played a few soft notes. Just for himself. Just because he could. Tomorrow he'd wake up and make Lily pancakes. Probably burn them a little. Drive her to school. Come back to the concert hall for rehearsals. Teach an afternoon masterclass. Have dinner with his daughter. Maybe practice that new piece he'd been working on. Live this strange, wonderful life that he'd never planned but couldn't imagine giving up. The stage lights dimmed. Raymond waved goodnight and headed out. Daniel sat in the darkness for another moment, his hands resting on the keys. He thought about the scholarship he'd turned down, the career he'd thought he'd lost, the years he'd spent believing he'd made the wrong choice. And he realized something. He hadn't made the wrong choice. He'd made the only choice, and it had led him exactly where he needed to be. Daniel stood up, grabbed his jacket, and went to wake Lily. Time to go home. Time to rest. Time to be ready for whatever came next. Because this wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, a new song, a new story being written one note at a time, and he couldn't wait to see where the music would take them next.